All right, so welcome back. Week 4. So we're almost the end is nigh. Yeah, so today we'll be looking at basically doing interpolations using stuff outside of Runway. So obviously, a lot of people played with the interpolation tool inside Runway. So today we'll mostly focus on using p5.js to do some different types of interpolation. And we'll also look at how to use like sound or text to control some of these things. So should be a fun day. But yeah, so before we get started, let's look at some work. I'm really excited to sort of see what folks have made. So I'll just sort of like scroll to the top of our Slack channel here, and I'll start talking to some folks. So Chris, it looks like you're up first. So you've been making a data set, which looks pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sorry, my muted. No. Yeah, so I'm sort of a week behind, but yeah, I was doing the smiley face thing, and I wasn't really into it. So I decided to go back, and it's kind of funny that I hadn't thought of this before, because right before COVID hit, I was working on an art show, and it got cancelled because of COVID. It was using JavaScript to randomly generate artwork, basically. So I went back and I talked to my coder a little bit, kind of tweak the code. And yeah, basically have, as of last night, I've got it reset up. So I essentially have like 2 folders of different styles of images, and the JavaScript tells it to randomize those in via a number of actions in Photoshop. And so I click a button and I create one of these things now, which is really cool. And so, yeah, at about 1 a.m. last night, I fired through a few hundred of them. I'll do a few more hundred and try to get like somewhere near 1,000, and then get training, which is exciting.
Cool. Yeah, they look fun. I'm really excited to sort of see how they turn out.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Let's see. So Allison, looks like you got some eyeballs here.
So just had to unmute. Yeah, I just wanted to go with something like really traditional for my first scan. So I just was like, let me just do photographs. And I thought left eyes would be really interesting to pull just to see kind of like how all the irises and the colors would change. And when I was pulling everything together, I really thought it would be great just to have everything aligned as close to as possible. And it really got this nice blend effect. Yeah.
How long did aligning the 500 to 1,000 images take for you?
I only did 500 because I was like at 400. I was like, I don't know if I could keep going, but it took about like 3 hours. Yeah.
Okay.
So like the image pulling was actually like, yeah, only half the battle, which is interesting. But yeah, it can be a little bit intensive. And what I had to do was I had to like pull it into individual PSBs. So there were like 10. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah. It was like, oh my gosh. But it paid off. I was like, oh wow, this looks sick, as opposed to like eyes being like all over. So that was nice.
Hell yeah. Yeah, it took me like 10 hours to do the 1,000, so I'm like, I can't
Yeah.
even
Oh yeah. Oh my god. I don't know how you did that. That's incredible.
pure insanity.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but like hands down, the hardest part of machine learning is building your data set.
Yeah.
And I think Chris started to hit on some things of like maybe you can automate using some generative tools. I know John hired his interns to work on stuff. His kids helped him out with scraping images. So yeah, it's this is the biggest challenge, and I can tell you like I've been doing this like pretty steadily for like 2 years now, and I built up a bunch of tools myself to like help with this stuff, and it still takes me days, hours, months to generate data sets. So it's definitely the hardest part. And especially when you get into stuff like alignment, it also gets really hard, or it just becomes like someone has to do the manual work to like make it work, and that can just be a challenge. But these do look really, really great. I would actually love to see another data set that also was just the unaligned eyes, because I bet it would also be fun because you would see like eyes pop up in different places. So if you want to play with that, you can also do that. But this looks really great with just the single eye aligned. I love that like even though there's a single eye line, you still see like so much change in eyebrows that like sort of like highlights that even eyebrows are not unique, like not that similar across people. So it's cool. All right, Steve, you've got some, looks like your shapes have been morphing here.
Yeah, so I processed 1,000 after aligning them. I'm kind of disappointed in the output. I feel like the couple things that I was hoping it would do would be like that it could distinctly understand where each one of my shapes was and what color it was, and then like create like a new set of like multiple colored per composition sort of things. There were a couple of images that I generated where maybe like there would be like a little red in there and then like a bunch of blue and then like a background color. So it was kind of getting it. My FID score ended up being 101, and I don't know, it didn't feel like as I was training that it was going down any more significantly after that. So I don't know if it's just the limitations of the machine or if there's something that I could have done better with my initial data, whether it was like give the different colors different textures to kind of differentiate themselves from each other. But it seemed like the machine wanted to morph everything into skin and like see everything as like one ubiquitous shape.
Yeah, I think there's, yeah, like this is definitely a challenge. So I would say a couple things about this data set in general is like, StyleGAN is traditionally meant to work with photographs. So when you throw at non-photographic things, it does struggle for sure. I would definitely say like, so one thing I think that is a bit of a misnomer when people talk about StyleGAN and like, these images don't exist is it's not like it's really collaging things together. It's more like it's trying to find averages or ways in which various images have similar features. So in that regard, if all of your images that you provided it are single colors or like this sort of duotone, it's just going to repeat that back to you because that's all it's seen in the training data set. So if you wanted to do something like, I want multiple colors in here, you would actually want to say in the training set, like, here are multiple colors of these things. And that's one of those things where, again, like machine learning people like oversell you on what these things can do or can't do. But when you think about it as like, basically every time you show the machine learning model an image, it tries to figure out what's salient, like, or what the features are of this image compared to all the others, and it tries to figure out sort of like a way to like a way to describe all those in your data set. But it's never going to like reinvent something that it never saw.
Do you, so I felt like, I felt personally attacked by the overfitting because I'm like, oh, it knows exactly that I like draw these shapes and only these shapes. And so it's like a statistical average. Do you think that like if I use just 3 colors and a background in each composition, that it would then similarly spit out 3 colors and a background, and that would allow it to kind of differentiate form a little better than what it's doing here?
Yeah, I definitely think that's an opportunity. And I think, like you said, like one of the good things that machine learning models do is they reinforce a bias in your own data set. So like, yes, you like to draw certain shapes or you like to draw certain shapes in certain places. It will definitely learn that. And that's, obviously like in image creation like this, like we don't need to think about ethics or bias or like those sort of things. But this translates very well to a lot of what you hear about machine learning in the world of like bias or reproducing racism or those sort of things. Like, even if you look at a data set and you think like, oh, this text doesn't have anything racist in it, like I can find. And then eventually the model like learns on text and it starts spitting out racist things or offensive things. It's doing the same thing. It's finding where the biases are in your data. And like in this case, it's just like, I like to draw circles in the bottom left corner, which is like a bias, but it finds it, right? And like, so that is something that is also true and something that you sort of like, it like sort of like, again, you feel personally attacked. You're like, oh, it knows me too well. Like, so how do I change that? And, there's other things like you could, maybe Chris can, I think Chris said he'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but like you could think about taking some of your shapes and maybe bringing them into Photoshop and using like an action or some randomization tool to like sort of move things around. And that might also like then begin to like add some additional level to this where it sort of takes it out of your own hands of you just drawing stuff. And then you can sort of like create a little bit more of a data set that is a little bit different than what you would draw as well. So yeah.
For sure. I know I shared an image in the color blend one, the what's it called, latent spacewalk video, interpolation video. There's like an image in that thread if you want to open up that.
Okay.
And so what I did find was really interesting was using the 1,000 images as a raw data set. I could put 2 on top of each other and play with Photoshop filters and then just like randomly select one of those, and it could generate new forms and compositions in a way that I thought would be what the machine would do. But it turns out I just had to manually do that, and I could still get the result that I wanted.
Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of the thing is, yeah. So I would definitely, if you were to submit this to the machine learning model, it would reproduce some of these color overlays in different colors in different places. And yeah, you would probably get something very different out of that model versus this one.
For sure.
Cool. All right. Ellie.
Hey, so I wasn't able to post everything, but this is the set I did with just colors. I basically just made a data set because I wanted to like scan in and use photos from a certain period of time and then see like how the machine would like make new memories in a way. So I thought that could be cool. So I started off with like my photos, and then I got all these photos from my parents from like the 80s and their travel. So I used some of that, and then just like random scanned in things. I thought the colored ones like turned out cool, just in the way that like I was interested in like the figure ground relationship and like how that would be a thing. But the set that I did with just like the original photos and textures and stuff like that turned out way spookier, like way cooler. I'll post them like after this, but it was definitely like way more interesting, and I'm kind of interested in maybe overlaying them or overlaying them on top of the original photos or something like that. But yeah, I think like next step, I kind of want to do maybe a more straightforward data set because this is pretty like soupy and crazy. But I like how it turned out. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I like, you can sort of tell this model like definitely understood buildings, right? It's like lots of building structures that it was able to sort of reproduce. I see a little bit of maybe like foliage or trees or that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the challenges of these sort of data sets is that because they are pretty diverse, Runway or StyleGAN in general, like will have trouble trying to sort of like generalize them in a way that makes sense. But you do get these really interesting sort of like, these look like buildings that are like reflected through water or something. So you do get really interesting textures and things out of them. Next week, I'll talk a little bit. So like, as you probably have sort of realized by now that Runway is a little limiting in like what it can do, or just like, you don't have $1,000, so you don't want to train this thing forever and ever. So next week, I'll talk a little bit, like I teach a lot of other courses outside of SSHH, like if you're interested in learning how to like maybe produce even better StyleGAN models, that sort of thing. I have a bunch of recordings on how to do that sort of outside of Runway as well. And I think at this point, you will probably get better results outside of Runway, but it's a little bit more setup time. It's a little bit more like code sort of level work, like that sort of thing. So, but if you're interested in that, like we can definitely take a look at that stuff. And I'll definitely talk about more of that next week. In general, this is like, Runway is a nice environment for us to get started and play with things and sort of see what we like and see what we don't. And then it's like, we might want to take it beyond that for the next level. So, but I still really like these results, and I'm definitely interested in sort of seeing what the color ones look like. I think I heard some chatter before we started class too, that like, it feels like color like tends to get like flattened or just removed from a lot of these models. And again, I think that has to do with the fact that, you know, these models are really trained to reproduce photographs. Like they're really meant to like reproduce realism. So when we give them graphic things, it does weird stuff. It tries to like figure out like, oh, there's got to be more color here, or there's got to be some other way to reproduce these colors. And, or, you know, it loses color because it realizes like, oh, black and white tends to always work well because it, again, it always passes the discriminator, or like those sort of things. So there's lots of challenges with these models, and like people are learning sort of new things about them every day and like improving them and that sort of thing. So you, again, as we talked about in week one, like lower your expectations, but also like you do get really interesting things out of these to sort of learn from. So cool. John, looks like you've got a bunch of stuff here. I'm going to play that video that you put in here. Where did that one go? Yeah, this guy. Go for it.
Yeah, so these are these busts that I pulled from mostly from the Met Museum and some other museums to fill out the data set. And this little morphing video really only gives you a small sampling of what happened here, because there's some really, I think, really cool, really interesting things happened. And I think it had to do with, I mean, if you look at, yeah, I think it had to do with the fact that some of the museums, when they photograph these sculptures, they'll photograph the front, the side, the back. So then you get these weird different things, and you factor in something like the back into it, and that has to kind of figure out what that all is. And so you get stuff, I mean, more obvious like in the top left, but then you get these weird, orbs and things like that. But they all look like real sculptures though, which and they're clearly defined. And I pushed it to 10,000 just to get as much detail out of it. But every time I open this up, I'm kind of amazed by what's in there. I thought this one was pretty successful. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can like immediately see with this one that there is that sort of like cubist vibe to it, where you can see a little bit of like side of the face, front of the face, who knows what else. Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
I love those
to me, it raises these weird questions. I mean, I see it the same way as you did, like these kind of cubist or surreal things, or like weird, like Geiger looking things, but it's like, we're judging these based on our known, universe of art. And is that even the right thing to be talking about, or the right way to be talking about this stuff? But anyway, that's another philosophical discussion for another day, I think.
Cool. And then you had your book cover one too.
Yes. So the one on the left, if you go on the left, the other image, that's like a sample from the data set. So yeah, I had my son, I just didn't have the time to physically pull another set. And Derek, thank you for helping trying to get that going. But we had a problem with the website, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so those were fed in, and this is what came out, which to me is it was kind of interesting, but this is probably the range of like, no matter where you scroll on this grid, it's like in this area. It didn't really kind of expand that much, and the color was like distilled down to like oranges and browns and blacks. And to me, that I thought there was some really interesting, really cool looking things like in here, but it's sort of really it didn't expand as much as I thought it was going to. And then the loss of color, which I still like, some of the other guys still had some really nice color in there, and these just kind of, the color went away.
Yeah, this is like basically like it kept all the Penguin book covers, and then it like
right.
kept all the black and whites, Yeah,
I don't even know if there are any Penguin book covers in there to begin with. Which is
well, what I think is interesting is, again, we can talk about like these sort of highlight what are sort of tropes or like things that people do with book covers, right? Like, so many of these are just like big text, like, block letters that are sort of centered. Like you can even sort of see the centering here, which I think is really interesting, right? Like you can see the fact that it's centered text and not left align. Like, so if you were to take, this is probably like the past 20, 30 years of book covers of, someone saying I really like these covers and sort of like defining their own sort of curated spec of that. If you were to take, say, from the 40s to the 70s, you would get a different set because of just sort of like trends and that sort of thing. Yeah, so I think what's really interesting here is like you do sort of see some of the trends, like maybe there aren't Penguin book covers, but there's probably book covers that look like Penguin-esque sort of things. A lot of the type treatments, you can sort of say like, okay, I can guess what that is, or like, I can like think of a couple book covers I've seen that look like those. Yeah, and this is the challenge of machine learning, which is like, the data set itself was pretty varied.
Right.
And what tends to happen is that, again, these are sort of like, these are big statistical machines that sort of average things as best they can. And a lot of times what that means is stuff gets squeezed out because, there's only one dead astronauts cover in there, so like you're not going to get a lot of rainbow colors. Now, if you were to find a data set that was all like rainbow colored book covers, like you would get more of that. So it's yeah, this is sort of the challenge with a lot of these, is just like trying to like make sense of, it's almost like, I don't know who in here does like processing or generative art or that sort of thing, but in generative art, you make the rules, right? Whereas here, it's sort of like you feed it a data set, you try to figure out what it defined from the data set, and you change your data set to like move it in the direction you want it to, which is sort of like counterintuitive for artists, especially because you're used to like sort of defining the rules and sort of making the vision. And here it's almost, you're doing a reverse process of trying to like guess. It's almost like speaking to someone that doesn't speak your language, and you're trying to be like, hold up an object and say, what is this? Like, what is this in your language? Like that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a big challenge, but it's it's sort of like fun to just sort of see how it works, and then, you know, hopefully you can control it a little bit more from there. And I'll say, like, my guess is that if we were to train this outside of Runway using sort of the latest and greatest models, we'd get a little bit better definition, but it still would be pretty soupy and would still be, you know, a little bit, definitely more challenging with this sort of data set, just because it is really so diverse.
Right.
There's text everywhere, there's different colors in different places, whereas, you know, even if you can compare this to like Steve's model, which is like still pretty colorful, but it has similar shapes in similar places, or it's always got stuff in the center of the page, like that sort of thing. So this is definitely one of the big challenges of just working with machine learning, is just trying to figure out, like, what the hell does this thing see that I don't, or like, what is it compressing stuff down to that I'm losing a lot of the detail that I want. But I think it's also great to sort of see like the book cover example compared to the sculptural model, because you can sort of see like why the sculptural model works better than the other one. But at the same time, you can also sort of see like, well, it's also like a much more like sort of linear data set, right? It's mostly busts. If you were to do a model just on the front of busts, I think you'd get a lot more realism. But I also think like what's cool about this set is like some of the more like morphed and weird shapes. Yeah. Cool. Was there anything else anyone else want to share? All right. Cool. Well, this is really great to see.
How
I
about
hope
Ryan's? I know Ryan had some pretty cool stuff that he was like midway
Oh,
through.
right. Yeah, sorry, Ryan. I know you
Also,
shared some stuff earlier.
Oh, I forgot to post these videos too. Let me post those right now.
Okay. Well, I know here is, where's, we got a couple here.
Yeah. They're slick, especially because like you got the little clip on top that's just like consistently there.
Yeah, so this was like the first, I did like my 420 data set just to like, I was too excited. I was too excited, so I ran it. And there's some cool stuff that started happening. It captured kind of the from the data set, the paper and the tape on top that I wanted. So it was capturing that pretty well. I trained the next couple of days, I got another 150 images in there and trained it again, I think up to like 8,000. And there's a bunch of cool stuff that happens still. I think the final set I had was like 650 at 8,000. Yeah, but yeah, I like how a bunch of them came out. The interpolation videos were pretty cool. I thought I was going to say something specific about this. I spent a lot of time like doing the different exports and like the different vectors, looking through all those. I spent a lot of time just like looking through them. It's like really fun. But I found like when I was doing interpolation videos, I liked the random that they were picking out a lot, but it was hard to like, I wanted to save that as a specific image. But it looked like I couldn't save the vector of that to recall it. But, you know, so I just had to do a lot of poking around to get like really specific, the ones that I wanted. Oh wait, let me send this. Okay, I sent those videos, but I think I sent it wrong. What else from here? Yeah, it's really cool. So like the next steps with this is, you can also see where it's playing with the eyes a lot. I could see where the eyes are, the eyes and mouth were before. But it's like with I would like the data set to be a little bit bigger because there's almost like 30 to 40 very distinct kind of imagery. You know, like there's these ones that look like this, that look like this, that look like this. And it'd be cool to see them just expand a little bit more. But I'm gonna take, I wanna make a zine out of these where it's like with the tape and everything. So make a zine out of those. And then I was also gonna, you know, print out, isolate a couple of the images and just like print them out too. But I haven't done that yet. So this one's cool. This one's.
That's nice. Ryan, were you able, when you were playing with the latent videos and you were like finding images, were you able to find the vector point for those images?
No, that's what I was just mentioning that too, because like it was frustrating because when I was doing those videos, I'd be like, oh man, those images are great. And I would like to save those, but I couldn't export them as like an image. I also did, really quick, sorry to take a little bit. I think Ellie was mentioning doing the Scenic Simpsons. That sounds super cool. I found like a Looney Tunes background one that I trained. And then like a Seinfeld one I trained. So those were interesting. I'll post those later. Yeah, and that's all.
I know on my side, I found out actually Runway doesn't charge you if you generate images through the latent walk video, because they're like rolling in the pricing for that. So like if you're poking around a lot and you just want to keep looking at images randomly without necessarily like going through the vector space thing, if you go to the model itself and then you hit export like at the bottom and you're like poking through the latent video walk portion, you can screenshot, like, because the quality is about the same, right? Like it's probably a little bit less, but you can screenshot it and then like save it without having to necessarily run the machine through and get like charged the money for it.
Dude, that's smart.
Yeah.
I love the little hacks. I hope Chris won't be listening to this video in like a month. So
cut this out.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist.
Posted really quick, those Looney Tune ones, they did some really cool landscapes and stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh cool.
But yeah, cool stuff. It was just fun. I just played with like training and looking through vectors and stuff. It was super fun.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if I'm glad. The fact you brought up the idea that you can't really save out images from your interpolation videos. So there is one way you can do it, which is just like, if you really like an interpolation video, you can split your video into frames, and you can like pull out. They're a little compressed because it is video compression, but it won't be as bad. But today we'll look at like basically like when you do the interpolation, what you'll actually get back is the highest resolution frames, and then you'll convert the frames into videos. So you'll have all the frames, which you maybe want to keep, maybe want to delete. So we'll look at maybe sort of how to save some of those things or just work with that in a little bit. So it was really cool. I'm really glad to see everyone's work. Yeah, so just as a reminder, next week, I've got a sign up sheet, which I'll link to at the end of class. We'll do just like a quick show and tell. So like everyone will have about 10 minutes to share work. You can share as little or as much as you want to. You don't have to share work if you don't want to, but I do think it's really fun and cool to sort of see everyone's work. So yeah, so just like basically show what you've been playing with. And it might be a repeat of what we've already seen here, but maybe we'll see more with some interpolation videos for next week. And then yeah, I would just love to sort of hear, like, again, talk about what excited you about the process, what was disappointing. Because I think everyone's been working on different stuff. So I think it'll be sort of helpful to just sort of hear where people are stuck or not stuck. And then also just, you know, it helps me understand for the next class, like what I can be focusing on or what I can be helping people with more. So yeah, this is really cool. I love seeing all this work and hope to see even more next week. Cool. So today we'll just be looking at interpolation. You don't need to know what any of these mean, but we'll look at how interpolation works. Obviously, you've already started playing with it a little bit inside of Runway, and I'll just sort of like talk a little bit about how it works, and then also how we can use P5 for this. And then I've got 4 examples here. I have a couple other examples on my web, or like through other videos or other websites. If you're interested in other things, I can show you those. But we'll cover just like basically how to do the same thing you kind of done already in inside of Runway. We'll do linear interpolation, but we'll do it in P5 just as a way to sort of get started. And then we will look at doing noise loops, which are just another fun way to just generate some like more random looping videos. And then we will also look at using sound. So I'll grab a quick audio file and we'll use sound to interpolate stuff. And then I'll look at a quick example that does text as well. So we've got a lot to cover, but I think we'll get through it all and it should be fun. And then hopefully you can also generate some more videos using these tools for next week. All right, so interpolation. This probably is a little bit of a recap for folks, but just remember that interpolation works by, really picking out a singular space inside of the latent space. Inside Runway, they do it by like flattening this to like certain dimensions, and you can grab a certain point in the latent space. And then as you go from one space to the other, or one point in space to the other, you get an animation, right? So that's what you've been doing already with the runway tools, you know, picking out a random space, then finding your next one, and then finding your next one, and sort of determining how much space you have between those spaces determines how slow or how fast the video feels. It also sort of depends on what your distance is, right? So like if two images look pretty close by to each other and you have 500 frames between those, it's going to feel really, really slow. Whereas if two images are really far apart and you've only got 20 frames between those, it's going to feel really, really fast. So think about like how different it is, the images are, like that's going to help determine speed and that sort of thing. So there's lots of little minutiae that you have to sort of work out as you work through these things, but you can maintain a little bit more control with these. And we'll look at some other ways to generate sort of looping structures and those sort of things to get into you know, having a little bit more control or less control if that's what you want as well. Yeah, so as I mentioned, like the way that we've been sort of working with our linear interpolations so far is really just picking points in space and then moving between them. So it's important to remember that in this case, like to loop, you basically just go back to where you started from. So, you know, if you started here, you go all the way around and then you just come back to where you start. Now you've got a loop because every point in the space is always the same if you go back to it. I think it is also important to mention again that like you may have felt like some parts were really fast, some parts were really slow, and that's just because of distance. And it's hard to sort of like, it's hard to actually know how distant things are from each other because, you know, you're looking at images and it doesn't really say like, hey, where are these points? And even when you look at the vectors, which we'll look at in just a minute, like it's still really hard to tell them apart because it's 512 numbers from between -1 and 1, and it's just sort of like, I don't know how far this thing is. So this is just a challenge of just these tools is like, and I expect in the future, in the next year or two, like someone will come up with tools to like help you sort of like manipulate distance and like create smoother interpolations and those sort of things. There's starting to be some tools now already to do better, like audio reactive stuff and those sort of things. So there's lots of people working on these tools, and I think they'll get better and better over time. But for right now, it's sort of a little bit of like no man's land of just sort of like trying stuff, guessing, seeing how it works, and then trying again. So we'll mostly be focusing on linear interpolations, just to like get started and to sort of understand the process. So we are going to use a tool called P5, that's p5.js. It runs in a web browser. So the trick for this is essentially that you're going to be running your runway model and p5.js at the same time. And they basically talk to each other over your local network, which is pretty cool. It's amazing that that actually works. The P5 interface looks something like this. You'll see here there's a truncation value, there's a frame count per transition, there's loop, there's download. So like I've set it up so that there's all the variables at the top of the page. All you need to do is set those, and you don't need to worry about code below it. And we'll walk through this, so don't feel like you're like immediately have to like learn code. But you do need to sort of know a little bit of just about how like variables work. And I'll walk through this process for you. But you'll basically use this. You'll run this script, which is just going to run for however many frames it needs to. It will basically, as it runs, it's going to download all the images. So it's going to download every single frame of your video. And then what you'll need to do is you'll need to figure out how to convert it from, basically you'll need to figure out how to convert frames into video. There's two ways to do it. For many of you, you probably know you can just like bring them into After Effects and generate a video using like the frame count. Maybe that's the way you want to do it. I'll show you another way, which is using a tool called Ffmpeg, which is a little command line tool that like puts images together to do image sequences. Sort of up to you. Again, like this class is like pretty, like I recognize not everyone wants to dig into like code and hardware and that sort of thing. So if After Effects works better for you, or if you have another tool that you use to make image sequences, by all means, feel free to use that. But I'll show you some other tools if you're interested in that. So this is the Ffmpeg command. I'll walk through this process for at least one of the videos, just so you can see it, because it is, you know, this is the code you're going to run in a browser window, and this looks pretty confusing, or it won't even be in a browser when it'll be on a terminal window. You don't need to know what any of this means so much as like it works. So just that's all you really need to worry about for this. But I'll talk about what it all means when we go through the process. And of course, remember this video is recorded, so you can always like come back in the middle of the week and like refresh your memory, follow along those steps, that sort of thing. Cool, so let's get started. So we're gonna go through just linear interpolation. So this will basically repeat what we've already done in Runway, but we're gonna look at how to do it in P5, and that way I think it'll help make sense when we start to do other stuff as well. So all of these code snippets are like all these web pages are linked from the slide deck. So all you have to do is like open up the slide deck, which I will add to our class list at the end of class. So just go ahead and open one of these. So these are just going to open directly in a web browser. So the important thing here to remember is that you always have to have your runway model running when this is working. So Runway doesn't charge for this feature, but it charges by the minute for you to run your model, right? So it's 5 cents a minute. So if you run a training and it takes 5 minutes, it's gonna be 25 cents. If you run, you know, I don't know, if you're making a really, really long video that takes an hour, I guess it ends up being like $3, $30. What does that end up being? 60 times 0.05. $3. Okay, so an hour is $3. That's not terrible. So yeah, just know that like you have to keep this thing running as long as your p5.js script is running. If you stop this, then your p5 script will stop running. So just remember that. So I'm just going to go ahead and get my model running here. One second.
So it's not charging you to like download the images?
It's not, because you're actually downloading them from P5, not from Runway, which is a little confusing. But I'll walk through the process and sort of show you how this works. So why can't I see?
It did this for me too, like the interface. It
Here.
switched where I would have to like press the ellipses on the model in the left. Yeah, the sidebar.
Oh, interesting. Maybe they just changed the interface.
Yeah, it's good for a while.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, let's try this. Okay, thank you. Glad you figured that out before I did. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and run this model from here then. So I should also say, like, they do have a web version. I just, because I've been using their tools for like 2 years now, I just tend to always use the app. But you can use maybe this is sort of why it's like built this way, is so that you can use the web interface a little bit easier. So once this is up and running, so the other thing about this process is we're not going to use the export feature. So we're actually just going to pick our vectors and our seeds, sorry, our vectors from the actual grid interface. So from the vector interface here. Let's see, are we running yet? There we go. Now we're running. So this works just like previously, where we showed like, hey, just pick some images. So right now I've got a sampling distance of 5. So maybe let's just crank this up and then we can pick from a really wide range of images. The other thing that's important to remember is that your truncation value here has to match what your truncation value will be in P5. I'll show you that in just a minute, but let's just remember for this sake that our truncation value is 0.8. So make sure we remember that for the future. So let's just go ahead and pick out some images. So I sort of like this one. So now instead of downloading the image, which you do here, we're actually going to download the vector. So we're just going to hit save vector. And of course, I'm going to pick where I want to save this to. So let's save these into a folder here. So I'm just going to call these linear P5 vectors. And let's just give this a name. Move this guy out of the way. So let's call this Freya4-1. So remember, this works just like it does in the Runway export, where you're sort of like picking a seed and you say, I want to go from this seed to I want to go from this vector to this vector to this vector. So I'm going to go, let's just sort of like, let's go from this one to this one. So I'll download this and we'll call this, oh boy, I have to fix that, .json. And let's find one more. So I'm going to keep these demos pretty short because it does take a little while to render everything. And I want to get through everything. So I want to make sure that we like have time to do that. So I'm just going to pick 3 seeds. So we'll just download this last vector. And sorry, when I say seeds, I mean a vector. In the other class I teach, we actually deal with seeds. outside runway. But for this, it's just think about if I say seed, I mean vector. So 4, 3, and then we'll save these. So we've now saved out 3 different vectors. So we'll come back over here and we'll just look at these files. So I'm actually just, I need to rename this one, so make sure that's correct. Add. So you should, you can open these in a text editor. I believe you can probably also open them just straight up in text edit if you wanted to. Yeah, so you can open these files. This is literally the vector. So remember how we talked about it being 512 dimensions? This is literally 512 numbers inside of these brackets. So this is the first one, which is 0.15, whatever. This is or negative 0.13. So there's 512 of these, which again, like we can't, like our brains don't really work like this. So it's sort of like, okay, cool, they exist, like whatever. So what we're going to do for each one of these is we're going to copy and paste these into the P5 template. This is the hardest part, and this is also like why I would probably say if you want to do linear interpolation, unless you have a very specific need, you should probably just use the runway interface because it's a little bit nicer. When we get to other things, it's a little more fun, and like this is kind of worth the effort, but like because we're just doing a linear one, it's a little annoying. So let's go back to our P5 editor here. So okay, so I know not everyone in here knows code, so I'll just tell you what each of these values stands for, and like all you need to know is that you edit whatever is after the equal sign here. So this is the first thing is we're going to say what's the truncation value. So truncation value on those on those images that I was looking at was 0.8. This next one here is how many frames do I want to create between each step, right? So if I've got 3 frames and I'm going to go from 1 to 2 to 3 and then back to 1. So in this case, I'm just going to go 1 to 2 to 3. So there's 2 steps between those. So it's actually 120 total frames. So this is just going to be 60 frames between each step. This will matter when you turn your image into or when you turn my images into a video, because frame rate matters, right? So if you've ever done anything in After Effects, you know, like you have to set to like 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. So this kind of represents what your frames per second is going to be or how long your video is, but it's kind of dependent on what your math ends up being. So just keep that in mind. So we're actually going to do 24 frames per second. So I think this will end up being 7.5 seconds. This will be a pretty short video. All right, loop. So if you set this to true, it will loop back to the beginning vector. If you set it to false, it won't loop. It'll just be a straight line. That's sort of how runway works today, which is just, it doesn't loop. Second, you're going to want to, or I guess not even second, but fourth, download images. So you want to set this to true. You used to be able to create a video directly in Runway. They sort of turned off that feature. So you're going to set this to true, which means it's going to download all these frames. It's going to download, what is it going to be, 3 times 60? It's going to download 180 frames to your desktop. So just be aware, like, you'll have a pretty gnarly desktop, but you'll move them into folders. I'll show you that whole process in a minute, but just don't be surprised when it starts downloading a ton of files. Lastly, you want to set height and width. So for most of you, that probably is 1024 by 1024. If you, for whatever reason, chose a different model size, just make sure you set this to the correct model size. But for, I think all of us, this is the right size. Okay, so now is the hardest part, which is we have to add in the vectors. So see all this gobbledygook here? We got to remove this. So like the key here is just like, so here's the opening bracket, right? And then if you scroll down for a while at line 14, here's the closing bracket. So what we're going to do is we're going to stick our cursor here, and then we're going to come all the way back up here. I'm going to hold down the shift key, hit click, and that's going to select everything in between it. And I'm going to just hit delete. So now I've deleted out all that text. So like, that's just the first thing you come back here, just do that. It definitely, like, for folks who are not used to doing code stuff, this can be a little daunting, but that's all you have to do is just delete everything in between those. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to come in and we're going to take each of our vectors and we're just going to paste those in. So here's vector 1. So we're going to copy and paste. And then after each vector, when you hit paste, just add a comma. So that just basically says, like, here are the 3 things in a row. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to open up number 2. For those of you who have a code editor, you might want to open it in that. I'm just going to open it in text edit because that means everyone can do this process. So go ahead and paste this one in, and we'll hit a comma again, and then we'll grab the third one. So you can see, like, this is why Runway is a nice tool, right? You don't have to do all this junk. It's annoying to do this, but this is especially helpful because we can do looping automatically inside this tool, right? So like that's sort of where like it pays off a little bit to have these things available to us. Okay. All of our values here are set, so we're ready to go. So first thing I want to do is I want to make sure this is still running, which it appears it is. Nope, it stopped. So this is one of the things I would find pretty frequently is because Runway has this like auto stopping feature. A lot of times when you go through this process, it'll have stopped your model. So just come back in here and make sure that you're running again. And of course, it's terrible for demos because it just like kills the flow.
Derek, when p5.js is pinging your model, would it automatically turn off in Runway, and do you have to like keep refreshing it, or can you just let it run?
So Runway will not auto stop because it's still pinging the Runway model. Like basically, okay. Runway stops when nothing is being pinged. So like as I was doing all that cut and paste job and explaining how it all works, it was clearly like sort of stopped running for a while. So we're just going to get this up and running again, and then we'll be able to do this.
Cool. And then do you have to add like any period after the 3 commas or the 2 commas that you had between the 3 brackets, or it's...
Oh, that's it. Yep, that's it. Yeah, it's just the 2 commas. So basically like I think you can, you don't need to add a comma at the very end. I think you can and it won't break. This is one of the problems with code is like sometimes you can break stuff and then you'll be confused. So I'd say just for sanity's sake, don't add anything at the end here. So just vector 1, comma, vector 2, comma, vector 3, no comma. So basically like, and you can add more. I'm gonna only add 3, but you could add 15, you could add 50. You can do whatever you want within this. Just know that it's gonna get taller and taller and taller as you do that, which is totally fine. There's no problem with that. Okay, so now we're set up here. So this model is running and we're just gonna come up here into P5 and we're just gonna hit play. And what's gonna happen is as I hit play, there's just gonna be a bunch of images downloading. So you'll see down here in our console, you'll see this saying how many images it's generating and like and how many they're downloading. And you can sort of see that this is already starting to animate, right? Like the thing is, this isn't real time, right? Like we can't actually get real time effect out of this, which is a little annoying. We do have to generate videos to actually get interpolations, but you'll see how it's changing already. Go ahead, Steve, sorry.
No worries. What's the auto refresh checkbox?
I believe that will basically like as you change code here, it will change what happens in the preview. Mm-hmm. I will say the P5 web editor is a little wonky. So I tend not to use it except for demos like this because then everyone can access these files. So auto refresh should update your, basically if I were to change the code here, it would update what happens in the preview. But because we're not really using it like that, it's not really that important for this.
Got you, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So you'll notice this takes a little bit of time, right? It takes a little bit of time to generate all these images. And what you'll see is happening is each one of these is downloading with the number value. So it's saying step and then whatever number file it is. So what we'll do is we'll take these files, we'll package them all up into a folder, and then I'll use that Ffmpeg script to turn them into a video from there. And you'll also notice that the speed of these is a little weird. It happens at a good clip and then it'll stop for a second and it'll like keep going. I think that's just because of the Runway server. So what's going on behind the scenes here is this code is being sent to Runway. I don't know if there are any coders in this group, but this code is being sent to Runway over an HTTP connection. And then what Runway does, it takes basically the vector that you're giving it, and it sends back an image. And then what we're doing in P5 is we're taking that image and we're saving it as a file. And we're almost done here. So this is my least favorite class because I get to show you how messy my desktop is. So you'll see like basically what's happening here is we're downloading a bunch of files to our downloads folder. And I think it has to by default download to your downloads folder. I've never been able to move it to like a specific folder, but what we'll do is when this is finished, we'll actually just like select all these files and move them into a folder. in a Mac. So if you're on a PC, there's probably another way to do this. I am not the brightest when it comes to that because I don't have a PC. I have a Linux and I have a Mac, and that's all I really understand how to use. So we're gonna select the first file, which is step 0000. We're gonna come up here and we're going to select step 180. And just for our own sanity, we're gonna clean this up by just saying, you'll right click on here and say new folder with selection. And they all get moved in here, and let's just call this linear. Okay, so now we're going to do another scary thing. We're going to go into our terminal window. So again, I know not everyone is comfortable using these tools. I totally get it. You can if it's easier for you, and you don't like typing in code and that sort of thing. You can take this whole folder and bring it in After Effects. And if you set things to an image sequence, that'll basically auto-generate like a video for it in After Effects, and then you can output it from there. So if you used After Effects before and it's easier for you, just feel free to do that. I find it's a little slower. It just takes a couple more steps. So I've tended to skip a lot of that, but it's sort of up to you. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to click on the folder here, and we're going to hit Command C. So that's just going to copy. What that does is in terminal, that actually copies the path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in CD space and then Command V, and I'm going to hit Enter. That just means move into that folder. So as you'll see here, where I am now is I'm in that folder, folder called linear, and then I need to run this Ffmpeg script. So most of you will probably have Ffmpeg already installed in your machine because you already have like other tools that need Ffmpeg. So After Effects uses Ffmpeg, other tools do as well. If you don't, let me know and I can send you the way to install Ffmpeg. All you're going to do is actually just take this script, take this portion of the script, copy it, and just paste it. That's literally all you need to do. You don't need to touch anything else. If you do want to touch stuff, like let's say you know that you like 60 frames per second, you like a really high frame rate, you can go in here and this R determines the frame rate. So you could set this to 60, you could set it to 30, you could set it to 10 if you want like a GIF, like sort of like animate GIF sort of feeling, that sort of thing. I just set it to 24 because that just tends to be naturally what we do. So what is the script doing? So the script is saying, let's make a video at 24 frames per second. Let's take all of these files. This %04D is just determining how this numbering pattern works. Again, none of you are gonna, I don't think any of you are gonna generate like more than, 999,000 or whatever steps. So like, don't worry about changing that. And then we're just gonna turn this into a video using this formatting stuff. Don't worry about this. And then here's our name. You can change, you don't have to if you don't want to. You can just type linear if you want to. And then just hit return. And it's just going to run some gobbledygook, which is just going to generate a video for us. So that happened really, really quickly because it's a pretty short video. It's like 7 seconds. And now if I go back to my folder here, you'll see inside of my folder, I have a video file called linear, and I've hit play. We've got an animated video. And if we open this in QuickTime, and we do, let's set edit, view loop. If we set to loop, it should just loop. Yep, so it looped. So again, this process, unless you absolutely desperately need looping, is probably easier done inside of Runway than it is here. Runway's gotten smarter over the past couple of years, and I've sort of made it easier there. But that's the process to do linear interpolations with looping in P5. Now, clearly you're like, got it, that seems like a lot of work to just get a looping video. And it kind of is. We'll look at another step, or like right after our break, we'll do another video that is far easier to generate from. So we'll look at that, and that'll also help generate some looping videos for us. Any questions with this process? Okay, cool. The first time you go through this process, it will probably feel a little frustrating. And then as you do it a couple more times, it gets easier and easier as you go through it. You sort of like muscle memory sort of like makes it happen. So the first time you're like, this sucks, I hate it. I totally feel you, but I promise it'll get easier as we go through it. Yeah, cool. So after the break, we've got 3 more demos to do. So we'll look at doing like really like cool sort of auto looping, and then we'll do some sound and text interpolation stuff. So let's take a 5-minute break. I need to get some tea because I can feel my voice going. So we'll come back at 8:05 or 5 after, whatever time works for you. So we'll see everyone in 5 minutes. Cool. All right. See everybody in a couple minutes. All right. So anyone want to come up with any questions over break or anything? All right, cool. So I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to turn on share computer sound. Let's see if this works. All right, so we're ready to move on to our next step, which is we're going to do these things called noise loops. And the best way to sort of describe these is they look like this. So you sort of pick a random point in space and you just like sort of like noisily like do a circle in the space. So what's cool about this thing is you pretty much don't need to do anything. It just sort of generates a loop. So we'll actually look at just like picking a loop. And then what I like about this is because of this sort of noisy traversal, you get sort of these like cool moments where it sort of like spikes into a corner and then comes back and like does some weird things. So I sort of like generating these. Like these are like the first things I generate for any after training any model, just because you sort of get to see a lot of like what the space looks like. And they're just sort of like fun, cool, quick things to share. So I actually find these really, really fun to produce, and they're pretty easy and pretty straightforward. So yeah, the whole process of this is just like, you just pick a random point, and we'll look at sort of how to, there's a couple things you can control in this, but it's also like not as much control, right? So like in this case, we're not saying like, hey, I want to start at this point and go to this point. We're just sort of saying like, just start anywhere and just start looping through some stuff. So there's less control in this for sure, but they're also a little bit quicker to produce. You don't have to deal with things as much. You can generate a lot of videos like this pretty quickly. So the link for this one is here. So just open this one up. And while I talk, I'm going to make sure my runway model is running because I'm sure it stopped again. Yep, it did. So let's hit stop. And let's hit run. So once again, you'll see there's less variables here, right? So you will see there's truncation values. So let's set this to 8 again. Frame count. So this one's a little, the way I wrote this one is funky. So don't worry, like if you don't really care about math, like you don't have to worry about this. But basically this is saying, I'm going to do 24 frames per second, and then how long of a video do I want? So I'm just going to set this, let's do this again. Let's just set this to 180. So that's how many frames we produced before. That seemed to work okay in terms of like demo time. So we'll just go ahead and set this as 180. So diameter. This is an analogy. This is not a real mathematic diameter. It is just sort of saying like, how wide should we go? So the way to think about this is the wider this number is, you could set it to 10. You could set it to 0.5. The wider this number is, the more diversity you're going to get. So, and also the faster it's going to feel. Like, so frame count plus this kind of equal how fast the thing feels. If you set a very high frame count and a very small diameter, it's going to feel really, really slow. If you set a really high or a very low frame count with a very high diameter, it's going to feel fast. It's going to almost feel like there's no interpolation whatsoever. So maybe you're going to want to play with these values, just sort of see what works right for your model. And I will see it does differ kind of depending on your model. So I'm just going to set this to 1.0 and I'll do 180. And if we have time, I might do a second one, just sort of show you how the difference in speeds. Again, height and width are going to be set to 1024 by 1024 unless you've trained on a different size. And download images, we'll set that true to make sure we're downloading our images. And then there's another value here called random seed. This just randomizes where you start, where your like model starts from. So right, so like in this drawing example here, like it's sort of like it starts randomly here. So like that's all that's really different. So you'll notice here that in this case, there's nowhere where you're setting the actual a vector. You're not grabbing any vectors from them, right? You're just literally saying like, hey, start randomly using this value, or you can change this to another value. So if you want to generate a bunch of videos all at the same speed or at the same with all these other different parameters, and you just want to change it, like to get a different video, just change the random seed. This value can go from like anywhere to like 50,000. Like there's no real limit to this number. So just like you can play with this number. What's nice about this is, let's say that I generate a video and I'm like, I want it to be a little bit slower. So I'm going to change the frame rate to 240. If you keep 1 as your random seed value, it'll mostly go through the same points. It'll start with the same image and it'll like go through the same points. So like that's why this exists, just so you have a little bit more control. If this didn't exist, it would just always be random. random and you can never like sort of get back to where you started. So just be aware of that. So this is all set up. I believe Runway is running. So let's just go ahead and hit play and we'll see what happens. So the first thing you notice is this started in a totally random different spot than it did previously. And I can tell you already, just from watching this, I feel like it's jumping, like the points between each frame that I'm seeing here in the preview feels a lot bigger, right? So I have a sense that this is going to be a pretty fast animation. Although I'm seeing like it slows down in some points and it speeds up in others. And that's, again, if we look at this diagram, which is like, again, sort of a rough approximation of like what's really happening here. I don't even know if it'll let me do this. Oh, well, okay. Very slowly. It's like, so you'll see that in some cases you're sort of like hitting these curves, right? And if you hit this curve, it probably like feels a little bit slower hitting this point, right? Because you've got images that are like all sort of similar in this corner. So that's sort of like, again, the fun of these is just sort of, it gives you a different feel. It feels very different than a straight linear interpolation. And so we'll see that, again, this is just sort of, this takes a little bit of time to generate all these frames. And we're almost back to where we want to be. All right, so let's go back over to our Finder here and we'll just do the exact same thing. So we'll grab first step, hold down Shift, grab last step, and let's create a new folder with selection. And one thing I recommend you do with these is a little housekeeping. You're going to forget how you generate all of these. So what I like to do is I like to take some of my values here. So I'll do, so let's do seed. So let's name this. We'll do seed 1 dash 180 frames dash 0.8t for truncation. And then dash, it was 1.0d for diameter. This just helps you like sort of like know, like if I want to go back to this one, I like it and I want to like change some of the values, I can do that. So we're able to just like, actually, while I do this, I'm going to go ahead and change one of the values here. So let's change the diameter. Let's make this a 3.0. I'm going to run this while I generate the video. So just so we have another one that we can quickly make as well. So I'll go ahead and hit play. So now we're downloading that. So while that downloads, let's just go ahead and we're going to copy the path from this folder. We're going to go back to terminal and we're going to hit CD and then paste in that path. And if you've never used terminal before, one of the only nice features of terminal is you can press up and you will get the exact same command. So if you press up twice, you'll go back to this Ffmpeg command. And then what I'll do is I'll edit this. So I'm just going to copy this line and paste it in here for my video. And then I'll hit enter, and this is just going to recreate my video, or just generate another video from those frames for me.
Derek, does that same process work PC-wise? Is it like you run it through the run application?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not like not the best when it comes to PCs. I do know there's a PowerShell in PC that allows you to run stuff like that. So you could try that. If you run into issues, let me know. Like we can just Google it and sort of figure out what's the easiest way to do this.
Sure, cool.
So I'm just gonna go into this folder if it'll let me. Cool. So now let's go ahead and I'm just going to open this in QuickTime because it seems to play a little bit better there. And we'll go to View and we'll go to Loop and then we'll hit play. So you'll see in this case, you get a little bit of these moments where it sort of like bounces back and forth a little bit. And you know what I like about this is like this was really, really easy for me to produce, right? Again, I don't have to go in and like select all my various vectors. I could just go in and like put in some sort of settings and then just generate this video, and it loops perfectly. So you've seen at this point it just loops. So again, I tend to make these a lot of times right after I finish a model. I just want to produce a bunch of videos just to sort of see what it looks like. And this sort of gives you a good sense of the space. So we're almost done with the other video here. So let's see, what are we at? We're at 1:30. So this will run for a little bit longer. So what I did for this version is I moved our diameter up. So this means I should see a wider range of images. But this video will also feel really, really fast. Like you can already see here in the preview, it almost looks like there's like no change, right? It's just bouncing, like every frame is pretty different from each other. So if I weren't going to do this in a demo and I wanted to spend a little bit more time on doing this, I might up the frame count. Basically what that's going to do is give me more of the in-between frames, right? So it's not going to feel nearly as fast. So you can sort of play with the difference between diameter and frame count. Like those two together combined makes up the speed as well as how diverse your images are.
Derek, quick question. With frame count, when you say it's frames per second times second, could we theoretically do something that felt a little more fluid and less choppy? So it would be like you have like a higher number, but then you squeeze that into a smaller second count when you go into After Effects to do it?
Yeah, so basically it would be like 60 frames per second. So like, you know, really high quality film now is like shot at like 60 frames per second or higher to give you that really, really smooth, like your eye can't even tell that there's like frames between there. Everyone has their own viewpoint on that. I tend to do 24 frames per second because that's just like a standard value and it tends to work well for film. But, you know, again, depending on what you want to do, you can generate more frames per second and then it will feel smoother. The difference is like if you were to say, I guess, I don't know what the difference between 24 and 60 is, but if you were to make it 60 frames per second at the same rate, the speed would actually feel the same. It's just like it would look a little bit smoother to the eye because like there's less breaks between the frames. If you wanted to make this even larger, like say you want to make it instead of 7 seconds, you want to make it a minute, then it will feel slower, but you'll see all the frames between it.
Okay, got it.
Cool. All right, so let's go through the exact same process here again. This will start to feel very repetitive because we're just going to do it over and over and over again. I love that even as like it goes through this rainbow phase. You can sort of see it as you scroll through here really quickly. Oops. And of course, because I was messing with stuff, I have to like kind of do this a little bit funky. So this one is going to be the exact same. So it's going to be seed 1 and 180 frames and a 0.8 truncation, but this time it's a 3.0 diameter. So let's copy that path. Let's go over here. Let's CD, paste that in. And then let's do this. And we're going to switch this to 3. All right, so let's take a look at this video. actually going to pull these two side by side. Oops, I lost that other one, didn't I? Okay. See if we can get these about the same scale. And we'll set this one to loop as well. Okay, so this was the C of diameter of 1, and this is the diameter of 3. So diameter 3 feels much, much faster. And that's because we're taking up more of the space, if you want to think about it that way. This one feels slower, but you'll also notice that, like, if I go to the very first vector here, pause these. These aren't the exact same for various reasons, but they're pretty close. So this is, approximating the same path. It's not exactly the same, which is one of the challenges of sort of like trying to control these things, but it is a little bit closer to how they work. And that's because of that seed value. So just be aware of that. You can use that seed value to kind of approximate things. If you were to keep the same, it's basically like seed plus distance or seed plus diameter equals like the varying frames. So if you want this exact same animation, like you really like this one, you just want to be longer, all you want to do is keep the diameter and the seed the same and just change the frame rate. And that'll make it feel slower and you'll see more of the path. So that's it for noise interpolations. Are there any questions?
Final question on my side. The frame count would just be the number of pictures generated.
That's correct. Yeah. So this is just a counter that allows us to number those. But yes, this is how many frames are generated.
And then if we wanted to like do the math before we turned on runway, is there like a general rule of thumb of how many images are generated per second?
That's a good question. You could probably time this. It's probably like your internet connection plus some other details. So it's not the easiest to sort of figure out, but I would generally say, we could look and see, let's see. So step 0 started at 8:11 and we finished at 8:13. So it took about 2 minutes to do 180 frames. So that means like 90 frames per second or so.
Yeah.
Nice. Or 90 frames per minute. Sorry, 90 frames per minute.
Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so because I want to keep moving us along here. So one of the things that you'll find is with vectors, it's pretty easy to just do some math, right? Like the idea here is all these things are mathematic values. So really all you need to do to control them is to have some other way to map that value to mathematics. And this is where we get into more generative art or that sort of thing if you've done that sort of stuff before. So you can take any sort of piece of data, whether it be like a text or a CSV file or like a piece of text or an audio file. And all you need to do is be able to take that audio file and like measure the volume or something. And that gives you a range between 0 and 1. And you can then take that value and apply it to your vectors, right? So let's say at when my volume is at 0, I want to use this vector. When my volume is at 1, I want to use this vector. And then all I have to do is do the math between it. Now, you don't have to do the math because I've written all the math for you. But we'll look at an example of how to do audio. But basically, that's all we're going to do in this process. We're going to say, when the volume is at 0, meaning it's silent, I want to show this vector. When the volume is at the loudest point possible in the song, I want to show this vector. And anything in between those two, I want to show, basically the value along that line. And so that's what we're going to do in the audio example. So yeah, so we're going to open up this one. Okay, so the trick for this one is there's one other additional thing we have to do, which is a little annoying. We actually have to add our audio file. So I've already produced an audio file here. And actually, let's demo this and make sure that y'all can hear me. So this might be loud. I apologize if it is, but just give me a thumbs up if you can hear this. Okay, cool. All right. So that's our audio file. So all we're going to do is to upload this, we're going to click on this little arrow here in P5. And then we're going to, how does this work? I have to log in. This is gonna be tricky for you guys. Okay, so there's a couple of things you can do here. So what I probably would recommend is first off, go to you will probably have to create an account. This is annoying. I didn't realize this was actually going to have to happen. So we'll just log in here real quick.
Derek, have you written anything not based on volume, but frequency triggers? So like if a certain frequency triggers, it'll display or do something?
Yeah, the challenge with that is that's really hard to do or like there's lots of other plugins or things to do that. There aren't a lot of JavaScript libraries that allow you to do that, which is kind of annoying. So in this case, what I'm going to, P5 comes built in with some audio tools. So I'm just using their built-in audio tool. If you want to use something else, it's a challenge because you can't really do it in JavaScript in most cases. So there are other tools out there, and actually I'll talk about that a little bit next week. There are some nice ways to take your pickle file out of Runway, and there's like a thing called Colab you can put stuff in. Someone I know just wrote a really, really cool audio reactive interpolation tool that does more stuff like that in there. So I'll show that next week. But yeah, it's just a little bit of a challenge in this case. So here we're just going to upload a file. So in this case, you'll probably have to create a P5 account. And then what you'll do is you'll come in and hit File, Duplicate in order to access the file, and then you'll be able to upload it. If anyone struggles with that, just let me know and I can like walk through how to do that. Sorry, totally forgot that was going to be one of the limits of this thing. So anyway, the way I found this is you just click arrow and then you hover over this and you click upload file. And then we're just going to click here and we're going to grab our file. It doesn't really matter. I would recommend starting with a very short piece of audio, just because that way you can sort of test it and make sure it's not like taking forever to upload this, to like generate this thing. So I'm going to upload this MP3. And then you need to name this like you need to reference this MP3 name here. So again, we're going to set some truncation values. So we're going to set a truncation value of 8. The audio file is, in this case, it's called thaw_trim.mp3. We'll again set our download images to true. In this case, we're just setting a frames per second. So basically what this is going to mean is what's the frame rate of your video you want it to be. You're not setting an entire frame count because we're going to use the audio length to generate the length of this. So all you're doing here is you're just going to set the frame rate. So I'm going to set it to 24 again. And then you're going to set height and width. And then what we need to do is for this time, we're just going to set a start and end vector. So again, in this case, what I'm going to do is what the start value is what the vector is when it's silent. And then the end vector is going to be what the vector is when it's at full volume. So we'll go ahead and we will, let's grab 2 vectors from Runway. So I'll have to go ahead and hit start again because I let this die.
Does the file name that you, the MP3 file name that you put in have to match what the file name that you uploaded?
Yes.
So that way it like knows what you're referencing, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So that's a great point. I probably just quickly glossed over that, but this needs to match exactly what this says here. So if there's a space, make sure you add a space. Generally, when you're uploading files to the web, I recommend not having spaces in them. But if you do, it's fine. Just make sure that it matches exactly. Let's see, are we starting here? Okay, looks like we're just about ready to go. So the process for this is going to actually be that what happens is we're going to take the sound, we're going to load the sound audio file in, and we're going to sort of load it. You're going to hear the sound play because it's basically like going to read through the audio file, and then it's going to pick out all the various points of sound, and then it's going to generate the interpolation. So let's go ahead and just pick some. So what I recommend doing for this one is picking like really 2 drastically different images, because again, if they're too close to each other, you might not even notice any of those in between changes. So I'm just going to come on here and let's just refresh this. So let's grab this shape. So we'll grab this one. So we'll download this vector. I'm just going to call this start. And then I'm just going to refresh this again, see if we get some different images. See, I kind of like this one. I think this will be a good contrast. So go ahead and download this. And we will call this end. Let's save. And then really quickly, we're going to come over here. And we're going to open both of these in our text editor. So let's grab the start vector. And in this example, we want the start. So there's actually no additional brackets here. So we're actually just going to take from the very beginning bracket here to the very end bracket here. We're going to delete it. And then we're just going to paste in our value. So that is pasted in as the start value. And then we're going to scroll down here and we're going to change the end value. So go grab this, hit delete, and then we'll come back over here and we'll copy our end value. Paste that in. Okay, so we've set all our values here. We've got our audio file in, so I believe we're ready to run, as long as this has not stopped on me, which it has not. So go ahead and hit stop here, and then we'll hit play. So you're gonna hear the audio play. That's just it's reading the sound in. Okay, so we're in the sound. I also recommend picking a piece that actually has some silence and has some highs. A lot of audio, you might be like, oh, there's drums, there's guitar in it, like, so it's going to be like very like different, right? But it's all the same value or sound volume, you won't get as nice of a interpolation effect. So, you know, symphony stuff tends to be good. Stuff where it has an intro and then has drums, like those sort of things are good. So you'll see this is now generating basically read in that audio, and at each point, it was able to like read sort of the volume of that value, and now it's sharing our frames. Now this one's going to generate a little bit longer here. This is going to generate 529 frames for me, and that's because this song piece was like 30 seconds or something, right? So it ended up being 30 times 24. Okay, so less than 30 seconds is about 22 seconds or so. So this is going to take a little bit longer to run. So let me walk us through what the process is here. So now that we've generated this, let me see if I have the code for what I need here. Yeah, okay. So this one's a little bit more complicated because we need to add the audio back into the video, right? So like instead of just creating the video, which would be silent, we want to actually add the audio to the video when we produce it. So that way we've got a video that can play both at the same time. So what is this? I'm looking at the steps and I'm like, I don't think I need all this. Anyway, okay, I'll follow the steps exactly as needed or as written out here. I don't think I actually need this though, but let's just see. Oh, actually, okay, I'm gonna see if I can rewrite this. I think this can be easier than this, but let's just sort of see. So we're gonna do the same thing. So when all of our video is created, we're going to bundle it up into a folder, and then we're gonna use Ffmpeg to actually generate the video. I'm gonna do this all in one step and hope it works. So basically what we'll do is we'll actually generate the video and we'll introduce the audio at the same time. Again, for some of you, this will be easier just to do directly in After Effects, right? Bring them all into After Effects, then drop in the audio track and like sync it up and it'll be fine to do that. Sort of up to you. I think I remember why I have to do this in these steps. So I'm going to actually follow these steps. I think there's an issue here where sometimes the audio is a little bit longer than the video, or like the video doesn't match up exactly to the audio length. So we're going to go through all of these steps just to make sure it matches. Usually in like After Effects, what you would do is you would generate the video into like a little clip, and then you would like stretch out the clip to match. So there is sometimes a little bit of audio sync issues, but in general with this sort of process, it's like pretty straightforward. And this is where like, you know, there's definitely better tools out there to do this if you wanted to get really into this, but this is just a quick example to sort of show you how this works. And this is going to take a while. While I do this, why don't I open up the other file and I can sort of show you how the text version works. So this is going to take another couple minutes just to download this video. So I also have another version here, which is generate text. So this one is this is a fun little demo example if you want to play with some things. So what does this editor do? So actually I probably can't. how would I do this? Give me 1 second to think about how I do this. I know how to do this. Okay. So because this model is already working, I have to actually start in a second model to actually get our text generator to work. That's okay. I can do this. Okay, so let me find another video here. Why don't we do our cats? Okay, so we will. So you don't need to worry about this because hopefully you're never going to run more than 1 model at a time, but I'm going to work around this a little bit. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to switch my network. And I want to set it to, yep, that's good. It already did it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. Okay, so while that runs, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to set just 8001. Okay, so what this is going to do, once my model is up and running here, is it's going to generate a little text field in my preview window over here. So in preview is going to be a little text field. I'm going to enter in some text, and every time I enter in text, it's going to change the image. And we'll play with it, and then I'll talk about how it sort of works once it's up and running. All right, so we're up and running. So here again, I'm going to set my truncation value. So I'm going to set my truncation to 0.8, just so I get some nice diverse range. And then we are going to we are running. So go ahead and hit play. And so now you'll see over here, I've got a little preview window. So let's go SSHH. I've got a cat. So let me just type in some other things. So I love cats. And I've got another cat. So now if I switch this, if I just delete I love cat, I get a different image. Or like I loves cats. So depending on what I type in, I get different images every time. So what am I doing here? And actually, I bet if I switch this to uppercase I, I'll get a different image. But if I go back to SSHH, I see, I don't know if anyone remembers, but this is the cat from the very first time. So what's happening here? So basically what we're doing in this example is all we're doing is we're taking the text that we enter into here and we're kind of like converting this to like a key code. It's almost like a secret code where like every letter stands for a certain value. And then what we're doing is we're taking that value and then we're generating a random number off of that value. And that random number then is used to generate a random vector, which is then given back to me from Runway. So what's cool about this is like I can generate a ton of different images by just changing the letters, right? So if I just do SSH, I get that cat. If I just do SS, I get that cat. If I just S, I get this cat. If I go SSHH uppercase, I get, wow, that's a weird looking cat. So, you know, but this is what's cool about this is like now I almost have an interface to generate random cats, right? Which is like, this is where it gets kind of fun is like now I can just sort of see like what word values are generating different types of cat images. So this is a fun one. I actually built this with a student because she wanted to do something like this and she turned it into a web page. So like you can actually like go to her web page and like generate some different cats or like I think hers were lamps or whatever. So this is a cool little thing again, and all it's doing is it's doing like really a dumb thing of just like generating text into random numbers and then being able to generate those numbers from that random value. So there's lots of things you can do with this. I don't expect anyone here, if you don't know how to like write code or that sort of thing, to be able be able to do this. But I think all these versions are interesting in ways to play with vectors or play with StyleGAN in a way that like, you know, maybe other people haven't before. So all of these code snippets are here. We're just about finished with our video here. So I'm going to give us a couple more minutes before we generate our audio reactive video. But you're welcome to play with any of these tools. I should also mention that when I mentioned that Nowco made a website, there is a tool inside Runway. It's called Hosted Models. Go back here. There is a thing called Hosted here. and you can host your own models. So like the problem is you can't just stick this on a website, right? Because you need a high-powered GPU that actually runs like in the background, and you don't really want your GPU running 24/7 because they cost about most of them cost about $1 an hour. So if you have it running behind the scenes for like days at a time, it's going to rack up some fees. So what Runway has done is they've done a cool little thing where like basically you can turn your model on or off, and you can host it on a web page, and then you can when it's on, people can talk to the model and get results back. Now, one thing to note is I believe the price on this is $0.01 per request. So every time I type something into that cell, it costs me $0.01. So every time I got an image back, it cost me $0.01. So if you put that live and it goes on Reddit and like people really love it, you might get like $1,000 like bill in a couple days, right? So like I wouldn't recommend like this becoming a full-time website, but let's say you have like an art show or like an art opening and you just want to like generate this thing and have it open for a couple hours. There's a really easy way to just turn this active on and off. So you turn it on, like have it run for 3 hours, or like maybe have like a day, it's like your birthday and you want to like have people come to your website and celebrate your birthday or whatever. And you've got like generated cakes. You could like, have people like wish you like a happy birthday and you could generate a cake out of that. So this is a cool feature. It is far, far cheaper and far less annoying than trying to run your own thing. But just know that there is a cost to this. So like, you can't just like set it up and run it and like let it run forever and not incur like a pretty big bill at the end of the time. So just be aware of that. I have a video, if anyone's interested in doing this, I do have a video on how to actually do this. You have to generate your own web page and set up all the JavaScript and things for it. So it's a little bit more intense than I would probably cover in this class, but I do have a video on how to do that if you are interested in doing it. So if anyone's interested, I'll send you, I'll post the link in our weekly chat or whatever. If you're interested, you can actually do it with P5. So if you can get like basically like what my student Naoko ended up doing is she ended up just taking the code from this, downloading it, and then hosting it on a web page, and then she was able to run it from a web page. So it's a totally feasible thing to do, and you're welcome to use any of the code snippets I have. This is probably the one that works best for like a web page, right? Because it already has like a text field and that sort of thing. You're welcome to use anything that I share in this class if you want to do something like that. Okay, it looks like our video here is finally finished recording or finally finished downloading. So let's go ahead and package these up. I should also say that I have experimented with how long I can generate a video using P5. And I have found that sometimes P5 crashes at around a minute worth of like video. So if you're going to try to do like a 2-hour film, it probably won't work. Or you might want to break it up into chunks, which is kind of hard to do in this scenario. But if you have like a 5-minute short that you want to produce, it might be a little bit harder. So if you want to play with it, like let me know and we can try to make it work. But I found at about a minute or 2 minutes, it does sort of like crap out and like you'll get errors and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is our Jacques Green video. Okay, so oops, that's the wrong thing I want to do. Okay, so let's follow the steps. I actually have not read these steps in a while. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to CD into that folder. So let's go CD and then pop. And then we'll go, okay, so let me read my own directions here and make sure this works the way I expect it to. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing we're going to do is we're actually just going to generate our video. So I'm going to take this. And it's really important that whatever you set as your frame rate in P5 is matched here. So if you set it to 60, you gotta make sure this sets to 60. Otherwise, your video lengths are going to be, the video and audio lengths aren't going to sync up. So I'm just going to hit return. And while that generates, let's take a look at what my next step is. Okay, so we're going to next move our audio into the folder. So my audio is okay, so I'm going to just take this audio file and I'm going to, oops, this is in downloads. Man, what a messy structure I have here. Okay, so we'll just hit paste, and all the way at the bottom here is my audio. Right, so I've got a video, I've got audio. So let's take a look at the video. So clearly we don't have any audio with it, so we can't really see how synced up it is. We'll do that in the next step. So, okay, so what else do I have here? So the next step here is, I don't know what this is doing actually, but apparently I decided this works. So paste this in, and then what we want to do is we just want to change this last value to the file name of the audio. So we're just gonna copy this, paste this in, hit return. Okay, so what that gives me is it gives me a value, which I think, okay, so I know what's happening here. So basically, for whatever reason, I believe the video and audio are at a slightly different frame rate. This can just be because of some mathematics stuff. So I think what this does, it makes sure that everything is set up the same way. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this. Yep, okay, I remember this process now. Okay, so for whatever reason, the audio is 26 frames per second and the video is 22 frames per second. I don't know why that happened the way it did, but what this command will do is actually resync them. So what you're going to do is you're going to take this and you're going to paste this in. And then what we need to do is set, on a Mac at least, I don't know about a PC, if you press Option and then click, that'll put you in the cursor place. So we're going to take that value. So we're going to take this value, we're going to paste it in. And then we're going to go to this value and we're going to paste this one in. Right, so the way this works is when you run step 5, you're going to paste the value you get from step 5 here. And when you run step 6, you're going to get the value from step 6 and paste that in there. Okay, so let's see how this works. So we'll hit enter. And then we need to switch out. So video, so we're going to switch this to be the name of the audio file, which is why it didn't match up. Okay, interesting. All right, so with all that running, now we've got a video that is combined. So let's go ahead and play this, see how it goes. Open this in Content Player. Go ahead and hit play. Okay, so that worked. So that is a very, very rough way to do audio reactive. It is not the best way, but it's a way that works. So I recommend playing with that. I will post a link to, I actually need to record a video for one of my other classes on how to do this for using some more advanced stuff that's available to folks. So I'll post a link to that later this week as well if you want to play with that, but with that model as well. It's a little different. Actually, I've got 5 minutes here before class ends, so why don't I go ahead and just show this. This is actually by a friend of mine. His name's Hans, and he created this really cool, actually wrote a paper and all this other stuff about this thing. So it's pretty interesting. Where is it here? So we'll talk a little bit more about Colab next week if anyone's interested. But I generally recommend that like Colab is like this cool tool by Google. It is basically the same thing as Runway, except it's Google servers rather than Runway servers. And it's free essentially, especially for stuff like this. I've got a whole class on Colab if you're interested that are recorded, you can watch it. But what's cool here is this is just like another way to generate audio reactive video. So in this process, what you would essentially do is you would download your pickle file from Runway, and then you would upload your pickle file to this Colab system, which again, I'll record a video for this because I think it's still going to take a lot of time to go through this. But the way that Colab works is these are all like cells of code, and all you do is run them one at a time. So you hit run. And then you'll need to pick your audio file. So I can just go ahead and pick that. It'll upload it. And then you run a bunch of this code. Is like you just basically follow this notebook in line, like just like you run each cell every time. And actually, he's already using my pre-trained model that I've already run or that I've already used. So you can go ahead and use my model if you wanted to. This is where you would upload your own model, and you'd have to set your own model as the process here. This is a little outside of this class, but like I'll record a video if anyone's interested in it, because it does produce some really cool stuff. But he's a machine learning developer as well as a musician. So like he knows all the cool shit to do with different audio stuff. So there's a ton of stuff that goes on in this process. But when you're done, let me see, I probably have his video here. Let me see if I've got it here really quickly. Maybe I don't. Okay, I guess I don't. But anyway, I'm going to record a whole demo of this video as well if people are interested. So I'll show that off as well, so we can go ahead and take a look at that. But there are much better ways to do this. We'll talk about a little bit more about some of the better ways to use some machine learning tools outside of Runway more next week. So that's pretty much it for class. Are there any other additional questions?
Next week is show and tell, right?
Yes, thank you for that reminder. So at the bottom of the deck here, I'll also add this to our class notes. There's a sign up sheet. So please sign up for a time. Some of you will want to go first. Some of you will want to go last. Maybe no one will want to go first, but someone will end up being first. So just sign up for a time. I've said about 10 minutes just so that like, no one's talking for 30 minutes and then we don't have time to finish stuff. I've got about 30 minutes of material I want to cover before we jump into show and tell. But yeah, just sign up for a slot, and then, if for whatever reason you need to leave early, like maybe sign up for an earlier slot and then you're welcome to take off whenever. But I think it'll just be a fun time to just sort of see lots of work that people have made. And as I mentioned, I'm also like, especially with the interpolation P5 stuff, if you're into issues, like please let me know. I'm happy to like set up some one-on-one time to like work through stuff. But yes, please make sure you sign up for a time. If for whatever reason you don't sign up for a time, I might bug you the day before class starts. If you don't want to show and tell for whatever reason, like that's totally optional. I'm not going to force anyone to. Just let me know, just so I'm not like calling you out in the middle of class or anything. But and also I should say, like, this is not like, there's no like, oh, I have to show the coolest thing ever. Just show us what you worked on. So even if you did stuff just in the first week or second week and you just want to talk through some of that stuff, go for it. This should be like really low key, very chill. No one should feel like they have to make a presentation for this thing. Like last time, I'll link to some of the videos or the last show and tell that we did. People literally just like opened files up on their desktop and they were like, cool, look at this thing. Cool, look at this thing. So there's no emphasis here to be like, you have to make the coolest thing ever. Like, I'm not judging anybody. I think like all of you have made really cool work already in 5 or 6 weeks. Like, don't overthink it. Like, don't stress out about it. I promise it's just like low key and chill and it's just us.
Derek, are we sharing our own screens to do this, or?
Yeah, that's probably the way I'll have it work. So I'll just stop my sharing and have you share, and then you walk through like what you worked on. If you want to upload stuff to like YouTube or like, upload to Slack channel, you're more than welcome to do that. But I found lots of people just have fun just like digging through the folders of what they've been working on. So I'll link to, I'll add the slides like as soon as class is over. I'll add the video in the next hour or two, and then I'll make sure I link to the show and tell as well. And again, if you have any questions or if you're stuck and you want to generate a video or something and you can't get it working this week, please let me know. I'm happy to set up time with folks. All right. So if there's no more questions, we'll wrap up for the day. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, guys.
All right. See you everybody next week.
Bye.
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 Derek.